Welcome to All About Impact, the official podcast of Imagine If Insights and Strategy. I'm your host, Susan Petoyan. All About Impact is the only podcast in the world that is exclusively dedicated to the art and science of creating real and positive impact with data, research, and insights. We push ambitious marketers, practitioners, and users of data, research, and insights to create meaningful, tangible, real-world impact with their work. Join us as we bring you diverse perspectives from hand-picked impact champions, incredible cross-disciplinary leaders who are masters at activating insights to transform business and achieve unparalleled success for their teams, organizations, careers, and of course, customers. Now is the time to venture into the world of influence and impact far beyond data and insights. Tune in today and boldly unleash the impact champion in you. In this episode of All About Impact, my guest is the Sherlock Holmes of research, Dr. Ari Zelmanow, head of UX and product research at Twilio, and one of the most influential voices on the influence of research online. I really wanted to host Ari because he has a fascinating background and unstoppable passion for strategically elevating the role of the researcher. Is that statistically significant? Is that sample size large enough? Ever wonder why you really get these questions? Or are you actually tired of getting them from marketers, product teams, finance people all around you? If so, this is the episode for you. It is in fact a must-listen or must-watch if you want to drive impact for the business by increasing your influence as a respected and valued visionary expert and consultant. Welcome to another episode of All About Impact, Imagine If's podcast dedicated to all things impact after data, research, and insights. Today, I have a super special treat, someone that I've been watching and admiring from a distance on LinkedIn. And I finally have a chance to speak to him live. Welcome, Ari.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Susan. I really appreciate it. I'm excited to be here.
Before we dive in, I wanted to give our audience a little bit of your super cool background. So Dr. Ari Zelmanow is very active on LinkedIn, first of all. We'll talk about that at the very end too. But currently, you head the user experience research at Twilio's communication division. I love the way you position yourself, Ari, that you're the Sherlock Holmes of consumer and market behavior. And here's the kicker. You're a retired police detective, and you horizontally transferred those detective skills into human behavior, market behavior, etc. And you really bring it to at least the people on LinkedIn that follow you. I'm so impressed by your message and the awesome creative ways you put that message out there. I'm so excited for this conversation.
Thank you so much. That's super flattering. It's always posting. I'm a prolific writer on LinkedIn, as you've said, and it's always difficult to know how that's landing because there's always those vanity metrics of likes, but you want to have an impact. You want to be heard. You want to the things you say to help form and shape the world. And that's just what's behind what I do. Is I want to make the world better for researchers.
I love that message, and I know we'll dig into it. But for what it's worth, I have doubts when I post too. Is this going to be relevant? Is this too high level, too low level? Like it's a no-da, etc. But my personal perspective on your posting, Ari, is like, oh shit, that's so good. Oh my God, I should have written that. That is so obvious, but so helpful. So keep on posting. I know a lot of people benefit from it. And again, I'm delighted to have an opportunity to kind of amplify your message further. So my first question is going to be, how on earth did you pivot from detective work, from police work to research? I know you're retired, but tell us a little bit more about that thought process and that transition.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I was a police detective for the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department. And the jump to research, it's not as crazy as you might think. Being able to use abductive thinking, like an evidence-based approach to understanding the world around you, to understanding problems, is something that detectives do, but it's also something researchers should do. It's this idea of probabilistic thinking or Bayesian updating, where you have some evidence and a weaker level of certainty about something. And then as the strength of the evidence grows, your level of certainty grows and you're able to make decisions. So ultimately that made that easier. I wish I could tell you that like the jump was super easy and it just happened overnight and it just made sense. But when I first left police work, I was in the world of organizational psychology for a few years, which was really cool because it helped me really understand like human behavior again. And it felt like a good jump after I got my doctorate to do that. But then I fell into the world of research. I started in market research, working for a large CPG company, looking at multicultural research, foresight and trends, new product innovation. Just loved it. And then I got bit by the tech bug, and that's where I ended up building several research teams that really help businesses make more informed and less risky business decisions, which is, I think, what it's all about.
I love the diversity and the depth and richness in your background. I had no idea all these things are part of your story. I'm going to go back to them as we ask some of the questions that I've prepared for you. I know that a lot of what you talk about, Ari, in the world and based on your work is about kind of making the researcher more influential. By the way, you should plug that new program thing that you have coming up. We'll talk about that too. But making the traditional researcher, kind of transforming them into a more influential, at the table, impact-driven kind of agent within companies, right? But to me, I think it would be critical to talk about kind of how you define impact or influence. Different people have different words for this. And honestly, the industry, I think, is lacking the right language, but separate conversation. But how do you kind of, in your mind, what constitutes influential or impactful piece of research or department when it comes to user research or market research, consumer insights overall?
It's a fantastic question. And I think it speaks to a fundamental problem we have in the industry today and why research has a hard time with the idea of attribution. So like in an ideal world, people would be able to say, oh, research contributes this much to the bottom line. That just doesn't exist today without I've seen some people create some fancy fake models around that. And I'm pretty opposed to that because I think that they're just not accurate. They're misleading. And then I think that it goes back to another thing that you raised, and that's the problem of defining what impact is. And to me, the impact that we would want to have is in decisions. We want to inform good business decisions. And impact comes from informing decisions that the business cares about. And those generally fall into 5 buckets. Growth, businesses want to grow. Increased value for the business. This often gets confused with like creating value for customers. But the end goal of increasing value for customers is to increase value for the businesses. Adaptability. So if companies were able to adapt to these economic conditions or COVID. Risk. All businesses want to mitigate risk, and businesses want to move faster than their competitors and the competition. So impact in decisions in those 5 domains is what we want. And research impact is our ability to discover insights, convert those insights into stories, and then have those stories influence decisions that better the business. And I think that's where problem resides with researchers today. Researchers aren't focused on being consultants. They're not focused on being that McKinsey level, Bain, BCG level consultant for the business that helps them make those decisions. Think about how that works outside of research for a minute. A company hires McKinsey, they come in, McKinsey gives some recommendations, the business actions on those recommendations, and hopefully there's some success. That is what research needs to, that's the place research needs to get to.
So dense, so rich. There's so much there to unpack, Ari, but I love the 5 dimensions or 5 kind of points that you use to base your construct of what impact is. Out of curiosity, do you still run into teams or organizations that don't hit on at least a couple of those vectors? Or do you feel like for the most part, most companies, teams, researchers are there, but they're not able to show that or articulate that, package that properly for the rest of the organization or the industry?
I think it depends. So what I find is that as researchers, we've been conditioned over time to either deliver data or to present insights.
Yep.
What we really need to be doing is presenting counsel through a clear, compelling point of view. And we've been discouraged from having a point of view. Stakeholders want to make their own decisions. And what I'm suggesting is that those are not independent of each other. You can have a point of view and a stakeholder can have a point of view, and maybe the truth is somewhere in between, or maybe it's one or the other is right. There's nothing that says that the truth is always in between. And I think that leads to the part of our job, which is turning data into stories into those strategies, and strategies into those outcomes. And I think where we struggle as an industry is that there are mature organizations that are better at that, and there are immature organizations that are not so good at that. And then businesses don't really even know. So we positioned research all wrong, and positioning doesn't live with us. We can say, oh, we do research is the best, or research can help you make these decisions. But if the business doesn't believe that, it doesn't really matter. So I think we need to do a better job of positioning research where we want it to be in the future, because where it is today is not, we're not in a good place. I mean, look no further than the headlines. Researchers are getting laid off. They're having a hard time finding jobs. We need to do better.
I so agree with both the fact that some areas of the industry, researchers, community of researchers, either doesn't hit on all of those 5 kind of factors, or we suck at talking about ourselves in a more relevant manner because we're stuck in a box, whether it's because we're traditionally introverted people, or we care a lot about objectivity, or historically we have been kind of siloed, that island. I called us the island out there. Why is this so important, Ari? I call kind of this impact part of the life stage or life cycle of research, kind of the last frontier. Why is it so important to have this conversation? Why should we not freak out, but why should we care so much about getting to impact and getting to impact the right way, talking about it the right way? Why should we care about this?
Because without having an impact, what is the purpose of research? Like, this is a question that we're all very uncomfortable asking, but it exists. Like, what is the value of research? What is the job to be done of research? Is it to be a delivery vehicle for data and insights or data? If that's the case, well, a lot of tools do that. Why do we need researchers to do it? Product managers and designers can do that. If it's coming up with like insights, well, I think even then, I think that the reason that impact becomes so important is that we're experts in looking at consumer and market behavior, translating that into integrating that with what business is doing, and translating that into good decisions so that a business can grow, have increased value for shareholders, be more adaptable, reduce risk, and have faster speed than the competition. Without that, I question, like, why are we here? What are we doing? Like, the reality is today, as we're speaking, researchers are undervalued and ignored. Some of it is our fault. And the solution for us is to transition from being these invisible wallflowers to influential consultants.
Beautiful. I have to break it down one more level. Let's deconstruct. Why is it so hard to do impact? What are some of the barriers that you observe, that you obsess about? Barriers, obstacles, resistance, whatever you want to call it, right? And part 2 of the question is going to be, how do we address those both collectively and, within the industry, and individually within our own like companies, our own kind of areas of influence, etc. So let's start with the barriers. Why the heck is this thing so hard to do that we have collectively failed? I agree with that failed to achieve. How old is the industry? Let's say some people say 50, 60, 70, some 100 years old. And here we are with all this technology. We're talking about our value, really? Like, why is it so hard?
I think at the core, there's a misalignment with of an understanding of what we do or how we work. I still, and to your point, we've been around for a long time. Why are we still having this conversation? Second is, we enter companies, we're hired, and then we have to spend time evangelizing our role. What other position in a company has to does customer success have to go in and evangelize? Does marketing have to go in and evangelize? No, it's crazy.
Yeah, no.
It's crazy. They evangelize. The second problem is research is a noun and a verb. Researchers are people who conduct research. They're specialized experts in conducting research. But the verb of research, all of us have learned to do since grade school. You do projects, and you write a paper, and your source is cited, and you do all of these things. And so then everybody thinks that they can do research. And I'm not denying the fact that we can all conduct research on some level, but I am absolutely pushing back on the fact that a non-professional researcher is as good as research as a professional researcher. And this problem we see it in this democratization of research, this idea, which is also still really poorly defined. Because I don't have a problem with people, stakeholders, like looking at data and coming to their own conclusions. Right. I have a problem with them saying that, oh, everybody should do any kind of research at any time in a business.
Loved it.
And the problem then becomes, what other functions in a business have democratization? And the arguments against it are, I think, flimsy at best. I haven't heard any great arguments for democratization of research. And the problem becomes then like defining what democratization is. But then I also think that once we can come up with a shared definition of that, and we haven't been to date, we would be able to have a better discussion about it. I can tell you that Nielsen Norman Group's definition is that everybody can do research, and that's awful. And then I think you asked more specifically about like what individual researchers can do for this. The problem historically is that researchers over-index on skills. We went to LinkedIn today and looked up a people search of researchers. You're going to find qualitative and quantitative researchers, UX, market, all of these things, tools. But if I had you go and look at LinkedIn or Google at the tools of research, you're going to see them say the same thing. So we're positioning ourselves against the tools. So there's three things. There's EQ, emotional quotient, IQ, which is the skill, the tools, the way we do it. And then there's OQ. Researchers historically over-index on the tools. Personal relationships, sure, we read books and we get better at that over time. But then where we completely fall short is in OQ, which is organizational quotient. That's our ability to manage politics, manage up and down in an organization, sell things in, present things. It's the science and art of rhetoric. It's what Aristotle spoke about years and years ago. Ethos, pathos, logos. Logos being the appeal to logic, which is using evidence and data. We're pretty good at that.
Absolutely.
There's pathos, which is the appeal to emotion, building empathy and feeling. We're mediocre at that. And then there's ethos, which is appeal to credibility, building trust and confidence. And candidly, we've been awful at that.
Okay, so a lot there as well. I want to go to the organizational kind of layer for a second. If we break that down, why is it that we fail, organizationally speaking, to access all the different areas, the right stakeholders, to deliver the right message at the right level, like peer-to-peer almost, it often you see it's like, oh, the SVP or God VP of something is able to go sit at senior staff and, maybe not at the table, but on the walls or around the conference room, if that's still happening. Why is the organizational divide so big still? I mean, who doesn't know that when you're in an organization, you have to be at the very least relevant, if not fully integrated into all areas of the business and understand how this team and that team interact, what their hidden agendas are, what their real agendas are, and what part of the business process they make up. So that if it's a consumer-centric situation, right? If we really feel like we're the champions of the consumer or the target market, customer, whatever.
Yeah, so I think people realize that they want to have an impact. The problem is that I'll use real world example here. If we look at almost any research deck today that is presented by most researchers, the way it's going to look is cover sheet with like the title of the study. Then you're going to go into page 2, which will be like, here's our research questions or objectives. Then you're going to go to page 3, which is like methodology. Maybe 4 is sampling frame. By slide 5, 6, or 7, you're finally getting to a point of view or recommendation. Yeah. We're burying the lead.
Yeah.
And when you bury the lead, we're now arguing about the wrong things. So like the problem is that we over-index on like putting arguments on the things that we should be experts in. And that erodes our credibility. For example, I want you to think about arguments in terms of 3 ways. There's arguments of the past. Ready? And tell me how these end up. Why did you leave the toilet seat up? You can't win that argument. Why did you leave the toilet seat up? That's an argument of the past. The second type of so that's an argument of blame. Yeah. There's an argument of the present, which is an argument of value. Ready? What kind of person leaves the toilet seat up? Well, you're also not going to win an argument on values right now. The argument that research should be focused on are arguments of the future. Those are arguments of decisions. Like, what are we going to do to help you put the toilet seat down? And at that point, now you're having a conversation about what to happen in the future. If you go back to my example on decks, all the things that we put on front are arguments of like blame or values. They're not arguments of like what the decisions are. Until you put the recommendations forward and you're having a conversation on recommendations, you're not having a discussion about decisions to be made. And I will put this forth because I would challenge anybody to tell me differently. Anytime, 100% of the time in my career, that an argument that a stakeholder has asked me about my sample size or about my methods, it's because they disagree with the study. It's a confirmation bias argument. So by putting those forward, I'm introducing a confirmation bias argument before we even get to the recommendations. And when people, the psychology of this is simple. When people make up their mind, trying to change that is incredibly difficult.
With data.
So we need to flip that and flip the argument. There's something called the McKinsey triangle. And it's an invert triangle where the lead is up front. You put the recommendations at the top and everything else to follow. And I don't even like calling them recommendations. You put your point of view at the top, everything else follows. When you do that, you're rightfully focusing on the things that matter. But you're also positioning yourself as the expert, which is that ethos, the appeal to credibility. You're still allowing logic to come into it. And then we need to make sure that we're injecting emotional appeal into our arguments, remembering that everybody in the business is still a human being and those things still exist. And so I think doing those things matter. And then I'll paint this picture. I wrote a post about this a while ago, but if you position yourself as an expert and as a consultant, you'll get asked consultant type questions. If you position yourself as the bagel delivery guy, you're going to get questions about what kind of bagel is good today. And that's about where it's going to stop.
Love it. Love so many of these like gems. Let's put positioning aside for a second to go back to the why is it so hard to do the organizational layer. There could be some folks in the audience that might say, hey, I do all these things. I know that I'm supposed to do all these things, right? I'm supposed to show up as a partner. I'm supposed to, start with recommendations. I'm going to talk from future state decisioning, etc. However, the organization is not ready for that. The organization, the culture is not receptive for whatever underlying reasons. Usually trust is one of those. Positioning is part of it also. Like if they've seen you a certain box, they're not going to all of a sudden put you in a circle. But what are some of those, I call them intangibles, intangible dimensions that are necessary to have that both way, bilaterally kind of respected, trusted, open relationship so that influence, that recommendation can land in a place where decisions are possible?
There are a lot of things there that are important, and credibility is one of them. So the example I'm going to use is this. A doctor, you can go to a physician, and the physician is going to give you advice like stop smoking. And if somebody chooses to not stop smoking, the physician still gave the advice. It's not like the physician is going to be like, well, okay, I guess if you're going to do it, let me work around it. And they're going to say, no, smoking's bad for you. You should stop. It's going to kill you. And they don't change that. And they deliver that, like they don't hedge it. They deliver it.
Yeah.
We need to be able to do the same thing. I think the second part of that though is, some businesses aren't going to listen right away. That shouldn't change the way we deliver, but it should change the way, the structure, format, the way that we present ourselves and the way we show up. If we show up in terms of research, historically, it shows up this way. We go to a stakeholder and we'll say, marketer, product manager, what kind of questions do you have? Like, what do you want to know? Like, so we're like Oliver Twist saying, please, sir, can I have some more? And so what ends up happening is we're positioning ourselves as like the gatherer. We're like, you tell me what you need and we'll go get it for you. That's not what experts do. Experts listen to the problems, they diagnose, and they bring the solutions forward. It's uncomfortable. It's an uncomfortable space because we want to be coupled to a product development process or marketing process. But sometimes we have to decouple from that and work independently and do generative or exploratory work and surface things that we think are important to the business through our own investigations, through our own exploration. And if we do that, it will help increase our credibility. There are a bunch of other things that we need to do, though. Like, I think part of that also goes to that EQ, IQ, OQ I mentioned. Sure, we need to make sure our data is backed by scientific methods. We need to be experts in the methods we use. We can't be the one who's like, when the stakeholders demand a sample of 500, that we're like, okay, we'll just get you 500. No. Why do they want a sample of 500? What is it? Is it because we have a shitty sample and the variance is going to be all over the place? Well, in that case, let's control for variance. We need to be able to talk like that.
Yep.
Then, to your point, you have to build relationships with people. If you are going to a stakeholder and the only time you're going to a stakeholder is when you're like asking for something, it's a very transactional relationship.
Right.
It's going to land well. And then we need to build consulting skills. We need people to build the skills of being a consultant. And if they don't, we're going to be relegated to being gatherers rather than hunters, I guess.
And gathering is getting easier and easier with technology, right? This is where you're like, I don't need a whole team. I don't need a researcher, a traditional researcher at best. When I have my own subscription product and I can do my own research, etc. This is kind of going back to the whole democratization thing. So to me, it sounds like you're arguing that the responsibility is mostly on our shoulders, both to evolve, right, become consultants or much more consultative, but also to set up the interaction, the culture around the research team with the rest of the organization in a way, right, that this is not the right word, but we're respected. We're taken, we're taken the right way, right? We're looked at, regarded in the right light.
100%.
That sounds hard to do if you're like a mid-level, I'm not going to say super like junior, but like a director level person. Let's say titles don't matter, but you're still kind of building yourself up in your career, etc. Especially, Ari, in super complex, like gnarly political organizations, right? Where survival is about like literally, sliding through all the political like landmines, sometimes hiding right below the radar, like, just doing the bare minimum or a little bit more than the bare minimum for crying, like not having an opinion. This is what pisses me off. You have to have an opinion. Even whatever the data is, you have to have an opinion. And sometimes you have to be the contrarian. You have to be the opinion bearer that's like way ahead of everybody else if you want this organization or business to grow, value, all the 5 things that you said, right? So let's break down the political kind of dimension a little bit for people who are shy or scared, honestly. Again, this day and age in this economy, to dive first in and have a clear point of view and have a voice and own that voice and to tell them, no, that's not the right way. This is the right, whatever, right? How can we make that easier for people, for researchers?
Okay, so I'm going to give you a half tongue-in-cheek answer, but I want to build off of it. The first thing I would say is hire a coach. Research is a strategic role. It is the consigliere to the business. It is the right hand to business leadership. If we start to bend and say, let's kind of bend around what the business really wants us to be, I don't see the CEO doing that. I don't see the COO doing that. And I don't see other roles like, well, let's just do what the business says and like what stakeholders want. Let's try to keep everybody happy. Yep. Sometimes our job isn't to make the business happy. We have a fiduciary responsibility to the business, to our stakeholders, to give good data and decisions that generate good insights. Our job is to make sure that the business is collecting evidence in an impartial, unbiased way. Our job is then to help connect the dots, and then it's our job to catalyze decisions. Some of those things, nowhere in there did I say our job is to make the business happy. And so the tongue-in-cheek part is, hire a coach, because if you don't feel comfortable with those things, then let's build up this job. And look, people would think I'm naturally extroverted, but I'm not. I am energized, not from being in big groups of people. That's an introverted thing. Mm-hmm. Can I perform in big groups? Can I speak in front of large audiences? Yes, because I've hired coaches that have helped me get there. So I say this because it is super, super important that researchers feel comfortable developing a point of view being a position supported by evidence, with the purpose of facilitating a decision that is non-ambiguous and non-qualified. And they should feel comfortable doing this. It's interesting. We talk about like diversity, equity, and inclusion. And what we're saying is that researchers should silence that, which is ultimately silencing diversity of thought. Now, I recognize there are unhealthy businesses out there. There are places that aren't going to welcome this with open arms. And sometimes you have to be in survival mode. You have to like put your head down. You have to do that. But I can tell you that if you really want to change things, the change is going to come from us re-educating businesses what research can be. The second part of that is in this idea of like automation and tools and other things that exist. The job of research, again, is the value that we bring is in catalyzing those decisions. We are not decades away from a world where data collection is going to become more automated. And if we keep indexing or doubling down on like, oh, I'm a qualitative researcher, I'm an expert in interviews, we're going to find ourselves out of a job.
I love that. I want to underline that. Look, technology, the rapid pace of change in technology has affected the industry. I've been in it for a long time, Ari. So I've seen every time there's something new and the freak out factor, and then like give or take like 5 to 7 years, okay, we adjust, etc. It becomes part of the toolkit. But I feel like we're not doing like 5 to 10 year cycles. We're like exponential speed here. And I always go back to this one thing that it is a human to human kind of exchange at the end of the day. And no technology is going to tell, no app, no product is going to tell a human CMO or CEO to give them that confidence, like you can do this or whatever, right? That is an innately, fundamentally, completely human to human kind of interaction there that, again, the technologies are not going to replace. That's my personal view.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think, look, you've been doing this a long time. The other thing I would tell you is this. Research tool, I'm not going to be popular here in a minute. Research tools, they are marketing to people to buy their tools. So when their messaging is like, do this method different or better. But the reality is, Pareto takes a hold here. 80% of research impact is driven by 20% of the methods. The foundational 5 are interviews, basic surveys, desk research, observation, and usability and concept testing. Everything else falls within those areas. Sure, we could say interviews. Interviews could include focus groups, maybe, but like basically those 5, if you got rid of every other method today, you could still have 80% of the impact.
And behavioral, you put under observational. Behavioral Correct. Meaning traffic and things like that. Okay.
Watching behavior some way.
Happen. Ari, since you're on the topic of methodology, and specifically in your current role, the user research part of the Venn diagram, I don't know how we've never talked about this before, but I look at kind of strategy research for me is kind of one bucket, but there's also like lots of tactical research, validation, things are being replaced by A/B testing and things like that, right? And then user research is another area. There's an overlap between strategy and user in my head. But do you feel that talking about impact, do you think it's easier or harder to show good, fundamental, positive impact? Positive doesn't mean the results are always positive, but good impact with user research. And how does that differ from, let's say, something like, audience research, like segmentation or price feature optimization, something like much more different, right? Like, how do you think about those two?
I would tell you the platinum standard is to get rid of those silos. What we should be thinking of is in terms of like strategic insight and foresight teams, where you're looking at a bunch of different data sources that help build the story. Researchers are ultimately and fundamentally story builders. Like, yes, we tell the story, but you can't tell the story without building it. It goes back to my detective days, right? Where you're building a case on something. You investigate something. So let's say you get a call to a burglary at a house and you arrive and there's a burglary alarm going off and the door is open and you see a broken window and then you go inside and you find fingerprints or maybe blood or something else. You build the case in real time with this evidence and then you build the story and then you ultimately go and you tell the story. I think that becomes really, really important when we're thinking about different insights functions. The ideal state, I think the state of research in the future is where we are pulling data from many different sources. We're indexing on gathering facts so that we can build insights that ultimately catalyze decisions. So I think it's hard to have an impact when you're siloed into a space. So if you are relegated to just doing usability research, that becomes difficult. Now, how you do that is by telling the story this way. Any of those things, any of those research areas you just mentioned, what you need, we as research have really failed to do this. And I'm telling you, in my entire career, I've seen this done only a handful of times. We leave it implied, the connection of the things we're doing to the broader business strategy, when we need to explicitly connect it for stakeholders. For example, if you're doing usability testing, you're creating value for customers, which then translates to business value. If you're not telling a story that links to the 5 things that I started with, growth, value, adaptability, risk, or speed, the top of the business, the CEO, the C-suite, the executives, they don't care. They don't care. Like we want to know what customers think. They want to know what customers think because it translates to business value and growth. To me, regardless of which field of research you're in, you need to explicitly connect it back to the thing a business cares about: growth, value, adaptability, risk, speed.
I love this. Again, I say this on every question, every answer. But what scares me, Ari, is that this is a shitload of work for an average researcher. I don't know what the split is, but to me, it feels like we spend collectively as an industry, just look at discourse on LinkedIn or conferences or whatever. A lot of it is methodology, or executional things, right? Getting to the data, getting to the answer. Maybe a good amount goes to like translating the answer to interpretation, insights, or whatever. But very little goes into what the heck is going to happen after this, right? So to me, like to tell people that you got to flip that. By the way, I don't know if it's a flip or a 50-50, whatever it is, but the back end needs to get a lot more attention. And there's lots of different ways to do that. But all of a sudden, your researchers, right? Your consumer insights people, you want them to be a lot more, marketing, a lot more product, a lot more all these other disciplines. There needs to be time and space for that. There needs to be tools for that. And again, I don't know if this is only on us or is this a splitting of like talent within a team. You have the counselors or the consultants and you have the data science people. I get nervous when we divide it like that. I'm a proponent of generalists in general. But I also feel like when you split too much, you have like many silos that perpetuate some of these hurtful stereotypes that we have. How do you balance that evolution that we want to achieve within a team or within one person's kind of realm?
So I want to start by saying, look, I know what I'm suggesting is not easy, okay? And it really requires 2 things. It requires researchers to develop EQ, IQ, OQ, be better consultants, but it also requires some change, some behavior change of business leadership. But to get that, be the catalyst for that behavior change, it takes both things. Both are necessary. Business leadership needs to recognize the value of research, and research needs to act as if it's a consultant. Now, with saying that though, I would say, yes, what I'm suggesting also takes more time. But if you think about things in terms of like, maybe we've all heard the term feature factory, where product teams they optimize for shipping stuff, even if it's garbage. It's a function of Goodhart's law, which says that when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. The problem with research is we have made our measure of success putting out research projects. We are like, we need to do primary research. Like that's, if a researcher says, oh, somebody asks for something, our first thought is, oh, we could do a research project on that. And then we start thinking about the methods that we could use, quant, like whatever. And the point I'm making is that we're optimizing for the wrong thing. We're optimizing for the delivery of a research report or a research project when we should be optimizing for how can we help this business make a better decision faster, a less risky business decision faster. Maybe that is the function of a primary research project, but maybe it's collecting data we already have and putting that together and making sense of that and generating insights from that. Or maybe it's a combination of the two. When we start optimizing for that, the time that it takes to do something becomes less of an issue because we're optimizing for the right thing. Right now, we're optimizing for projects completed because we're worried about articulating about our value. And for good reason. We're getting laid off and other things. The reality is our value isn't from delivering decks. Decks are just paper. In fact, 98%, one of the problems I'm going to be focusing on in the near future is this repository problem. But the reality is research repositories today are graveyards. They're graveyards for previous research. It's where research goes to die. It's Google Drive, it's SharePoint.
There's products for that. Yeah.
It's awful. So I think what we need to do is optimize for the right thing.
Wonderful. Again, there's a lot of takeaways there. Ari, one other kind of flavor of, I think maybe the same question is this. I think most of the conversation we've had so far has been focused on kind of the researcher interacting with other stakeholders on an equal footing, right? There's a business problem, let's say, et cetera, that we're coming together to solve. On an equal footing. The one place I feel like foresight, I think is what you call it, is when the researcher team, the insights team, has connected so many dots, either historically, horizontally looking across, or looking ahead, that ideally they should be empowered to put things on the C-suite's agenda that are not directly related to value today, stock price today, whatever, but they're about like the next 5 years, 10 years, whatever, right? The shit that's going to come very fast and people are not realize that's here and it's going to be too late and all of that. So let's say, foresights or forward-looking research. Again, this requires not only a whole different set of special skills, perhaps technically speaking, but it also requires the courage, all the EQ, all the different things that we mentioned. But people still shy away from that. They still want to be the voice of the facts, the voice of the reason, the voice of, what's going on now. Maybe, okay, we can forecast, we can project things, etc., as opposed to the agenda setter, as opposed to the captain that says the lighthouse is that way. We should be going there and we're headed this way, right? It's a different function. It's like, consultant to consultant at the highest level. Tell me if you've thought about this before. I'm sure you have. Like, what are your thoughts about behaving or acting, fulfilling that kind of a function above and beyond just being a reader of kind of where things stand now or maybe tomorrow? The day after tomorrow is what I care a lot about personally.
Yeah. So again, tongue in cheek, I'll say take a play from Nike's playbook and just do it. So what I would say is junior, senior, doesn't matter. Carve out a little bit of time and do the work. Do it anyway. We right now, we as an industry we're very reactive. Like we wait until somebody asks us for something to do it. And what I'm suggesting is you don't have to wait. Don't ask for permission. Just go do the work, bring it forth, do good work, and present it. You'll be conditioning the C-suite to expect those things from you, which is retraining them. And you have a fiduciary responsibility to the business to be doing that work. Like we have a skill that we're saying is valuable, important to the business, yet we're not using it except to react to certain things. It's this idea of I want people to be proactive and instead of and take some deliberation and think about these problems and then think about the way to present them so that they're well received. Don't bury the lead 7 slides in. Present it to an executive audience. Know that like a 1-pager is probably the way to go there, or 3 slides, opening it up for conversation. Put it out there and start catalyzing those conversations, which will then catalyze decisions. And when we do that, we're going to find that the business is going to start forming strategy around the things that we're bringing up because it's valuable. So again, I would say do it. And guess what? Sometimes this is the other problem that research has. We want to bat 1,000. Research doesn't bat 1,000. In Major League Baseball, a phenomenal hitter bats a 300. Okay? We need to think in terms of that. Like sometimes research is going to knock it out of the park, but other times research is not. And that's okay. Sometimes pertinent positives, the things that we should do, the things that are big, like those are the home runs that everybody wants. But sometimes there's pertinent negatives, like, don't do this. It's going to cost us a lot of money. Or, hey, we did research. And guess what? We didn't find something. But that is just as valuable because, okay, now we don't need to research that. We've built upon a body of knowledge that the business can then use going forward. And our job is to build upon a body of knowledge, build facts that can then be used to generate insights, which catalyze decisions.
With that said, Ari, ideally, where is research positioned? Technically, it's often under marketing
or product.
Sometimes scary. Sometimes it's under finance, which is like kiss of death for me. Love to all my finance friends. But sometimes it's, buried in like digital analytics somewhere, like very geeky. The geography is part of the challenge here. And the more we stay inside the box, we don't see the shape of the box, let alone what's around the box. So to me, like we need to even think about this. Where do you ideally put research, analytics, research insights, anything related to kind of data, if you will? Where is the best place within the organization?
Generally speaking, it should be reporting. In an ideal situation, if you told me the platinum standard, you'd have a chief research officer. You'd have somebody in the C-suite responsible for insights, or a chief insights officer, or some version of that, somebody in the C-suite. Many times that doesn't happen, and we haven't hit the maturity that happens across all companies. The second best spot is either reporting directly to the CEO or the chief operating officer that is beholden to nobody. And that helps protect the integrity of the work we do. We shouldn't be a weapon for confirmation bias. We should be able to speak the truth to the business, like it or not. And so it should have a reporting structure that leads to the C-suite. When you start burying it lower, it becomes much harder to do some of the strategic things I'm suggesting today.
Yeah, because there's too much of a upward distance to travel or traverse. Awesome. Ari, we're running out of time. I just realized we can talk on and on, but I usually, first of all, thank you for such rich, boundary pushing and generous insight so far. I know that everyone listening is going to be like a little bit here, but that's the purpose. So I want to wrap up with 3 questions I ask everyone. And this is, kind of like a little bit about you, but also your work, however you want to answer. What is one thing that you do personally, almost like on a daily basis, that results in positive impact? It could be within your work, within your team, company, the world, the universe, etc.
Well, I take time every day I write every day. And so by writing, I think writing makes better thinkers. And sometimes I'll write by myself. Sometimes I'll write with my kids. Sometimes I write my social posts. But writing helps me develop thinking. And writing helps me evolve thinking. So sometimes my thinking changes over time. Like there was a point in time when I was a lot more open to democratization. And today I am not. I'm less open. I'm still open to debate on it, but I'm not a big fan of it. So I would say writing is probably the number one thing that I do.
Love that. A very unusual answer, but very helpful answer. We should do a whole separate thing on democratization. I got a feeling recently that when I say I'm not really in love with the idea of democratizing the process or research in general, I start to feel like, am I getting really old? Like, are all these Gen Zs and millennials like making me feel like I'm old school? But separate talk show. So number 2, what do you encourage our audience? Most of them are either stakeholders or research practitioners, buyers, etc. What do you encourage folks to do to have positive impact in their own lives, in their own careers, the world, etc.?
I guess the biggest advice I could give everybody is seek professional development opportunities outside of traditional method tool growth. So don't take qualitative research courses. Don't take quantitative research courses. Take professional development and how to become a better consultant. Take professional development on writing, or I'm taking a video course right now to be better at video, public speaking. Like, think outside of your general domain. So I would say develop thinking about the 3 things I talked about today: EQ, IQ, and OQ. And you should be over-indexing on EQ and OQ.
Ari, actually, that's a great point. So we should probably caveat it that, I don't know if it's a caveat, but stated overtly that we're not saying that methodology, like the science of what we do, is unimportant.
No, it's absolutely super important.
It's the foundation. But above that is the roof, or whatever analogy you want to use, that is missing right now, right? I want to make sure the audience hears that from you, and we're not coming across like we're just advocating, go become a great corporate internal marketer and all of that, right?
I want to be crystal clear. Strong scientific-backed methods are table stakes. You should have that. Like that to me, that shouldn't even be part of the conversation. It's table stakes. Like you can't even. It's the ante to play at the table. At a poker table, you have to play the ante to join the hand. Having strong methodological rigor and an understanding of the different methods. Definitely, if you don't know the core 5 that I talked about, start there too. Like interviews, surveys, desk research, field observation, and usability and concept testing. If you don't know those, yes, that's table stakes. But once you know that, you're 80%, I said 80% there with those. So start there, but then I need people in research to think outside of that. Like, how can I take those skills, the research skills, and supercharge them?
Yeah. And, there is a little bit of an argument for, if you need to enhance your quant skills, let's say, with a course in, choice methodologies or whatever, there is that argument too. We're not saying, just learn those things and they're stable and that's all you need to do. Now you need to focus. But this conversation is dedicated to the missing things that we're not even talking about, which I love. So with all of this said, Ari, I'm so grateful again for this conversation, supercharged and stimulated here. How do our audience members find you? What's the best way to reach out to you? Tell us where you are.
A few ways. One, arizelmanow.com is my website. You can sign up for my mailing list there, which is always great. I send out a really cool email a week. LinkedIn is another good spot. You could always, I post daily on LinkedIn. So if you're looking for content on this and other topics. And then we also, my friend and compatriot, Dr. Nick Fine, and I have a course called The Influential Researcher. It's on Maven right now. We also, and where we are teaching EQ, IQ, and OQ, but specifically, if we were going to break it down into 2 components, because I'm glad you mentioned this, Susan, half of the course is based on the science of methodological rigor, science of UX, and the other half is based on how do I use the science stuff to be influential. And so we're teaching both sides.
Awesome. So Ari, just to make sure we hear you, the course already exists and it's on Maven, or are you guys launching it?
It is launching. In May 1st will be the first cohort, the inaugural launch cohort. There are still some seats open, and then we will probably launch additional cohorts in the future.
Excellent. So this is a great plug for that. If you guys found any of this conversation slightly inspiring, you have to sign up look into the course that is already live. Ari, thank you so much for your time, for the rich discussion. I feel like this is something that we can, we should continue to talk and evangelize for the rest of the industry and start like a little movement, impact champions or whatever we want to call it. But I've had such a great time during this recording. Thank you.
Me too. Thank you for having me. This has been fantastic.
Awesome. Thanks, Ari. Wasn't that a mind-blowing session for you? As you heard in this powerful episode of All About Impact, research and insights professionals have a lot of work to do in order to drive real impact with their work. How are you building your influence and creating powerful impact for your team and your brand? Are you even thinking about impact and influence at all? Impact is the next dimension of research and insights, and it is possible with the right partner. Reach out to me, Susan Petoyan, on LinkedIn, and let's together discover the impact champion in you. Tune in next week for another episode of All About Impact.